All right, hello, welcome everyone to Star Trek from the Holodeck. I am Michael, your host, and today I'm in the. Where am I, David? Am I on City Alpha 5? Am I on Books Planet about to explode? We're on the bridge, I guess, of the USS Rayman Digital, and David, my ensign, is standing by.
I'm ready to save us and teleport us out of here.
You know what? You've been demoted. You're a Yowman now.
I'm a yeoman.
Is it a Yowman or a Yeoman?
Yeoman.
Is it? I don't even remember. They were in one season of the original series, I think. And then that position never made its way into Star Trek. I don't think. All right. So today, David, you and I are going to dig back into Star Trek Section 31. And what I mean by dig back into Section 31,
yes.
We were going to stay away from this movie for a while, but when we first did the review, we did it, I want to say, 10 hours after the movie was released.
When the wounds were fresh.
And there was a lot of confusion about how this movie was going to fit into Star Trek canon, meaning where did it take place chronologically? And we mentioned a few things that were grossly inaccurate, thanks to most of our listeners who said, well, actually, here's an article that they just published. And to be fair to us, there were a lot of people trying to figure this out. There's like 10 different Reddit posts trying to figure out how this works. Because what threw us off apparently threw off a lot of people. And it's the way the movie starts, David.
Yes.
So what we're going to do in this discussion is we're going to clarify for our listeners as well as ourselves the actual time frame that this movie takes place, and by doing so it's also going to change some of our own interpretations of things that we have floated, ideas that we have floated over the last 4 years. That is obviously not the case because they changed certain things, or at least the way we interpret it, the way they left it open-ended, they have now closed it and explained actually what they mean by this. And what I'm talking about specifically is where the Guardian of Forever sent Giorgio. Because that is really what threw off our ability to interpret where this movie's taking place. Yeah. Now, the movie doesn't help.
No.
It doesn't help. It confuses more. When you start a movie off saying circa 2257, your mind sticks to that year.
Yes.
And we assume 2257, that's the era of Discovery. That's right in the exact same year. So how does this work? It doesn't make sense. Well, they were just simply, because of that horrible introduction, that Suicide Squad, Mission Impossible TV series type of intro, wanted to introduce this idea that Giorgio was brought, which is true, brought from the Terran Empire in 2257 to the Prime. So when you start your movie off that way and you give us no other years, what do most rational people think? Oh, this takes place in the year 2257. Okay. But it obviously doesn't. It doesn't make sense. That's what some of our problems were with. Well, the writing of the entire movie had a lot of issues. But one of our biggest problems was that we couldn't pinpoint where this took place, and if it did take place in the 2257, the Discovery era, then how does this work in unison with Star Trek Discovery? Well, David, this takes place roughly 40 years before the Next Generation, which is what we were told originally. That's why I was confused by the year 2257. And when you combine that with how we interpreted what the Guardian of Forever told Giorgio in Discovery Season 3, it just created all types of fuckery. So let's start first with where this takes place, and then we'll get into our own fuckery. You know, how we misinterpreted this so poorly because of things that we interpreted from Discovery incorrectly.
Yes.
Or at least, I would say not incorrectly, but at least we didn't have much more to go on other than our own interpretation. So Star Trek Section 31's exact placement in the Star Trek's timeline is now clear, and here's what it means for Star Trek The Next Generation. Now, the movie Section 31 is directed by Olatunde Asunami and written by Craig Sweeney. Star Trek Section 31 is, of course, now streaming on Paramount Plus. If you haven't tortured yourself yet, go ahead and please do so. It's headlined by Academy Award winner Michelle Yeoh, who they completely just treat unfairly in this movie. So Star Trek Discovery Section 31 is the first Star Trek movie in 9 years and the first Star Trek movie made for streaming on Paramount Plus, and hopefully the last one. If this is what they're giving to us on Paramount Plus, I don't want this. Give me theatrical releases because this is not great. So Emperor Philippa Georgiou's last appearance was in Star Trek Discovery Season 3, when the Guardian of Forever judged whether the former Terran ruler, the Mirror Universe's Terran Empire, had sufficiently changed. The Guardian of Forever sent Georgiou to an unknown destination where the Prime and the Mirror Universes were more closely aligned, as they were broken apart in Star Trek Discovery's 32nd century. Georgiou reappeared somewhere in the mid-24th century's lost era of Star Trek. That's what most of us fans call it. Thankfully, Star Trek Section 31 wastes no time defining when exactly the movie. What? What does this article say? I'm going to erase that part. What a try-hard article. So Star Trek Section 31 establishes that its main story takes place on Stardate 1292.4. So this converts to April 17th, 2334. This means Section 31 is set 40 years before Star Trek The Next Generation, which begins in 2364 with its 2-hour premiere Encounter at Farpoint. Star Trek Section 31 is also the first full-length Star Trek adventure set in the 24th century's lost era. So that is clear, right? We understand that now. It takes place 40 years prior to the events of Star Trek The Next Generation, which now makes sense.
The characters that they play around with in Section 31 just open up a lot of questions.
Well, yeah, because that was one of the things that confused me that I just decided not to even really touch on because I was just so frustrated with what they were trying to do with this series. But you had Casey Roll's character who played Rachel Garrett. I'm like, well, Rachel Garrett was the captain of the Enterprise in the Lost Era. So if this takes place like the beginning of the movies alluded to, 2267, or 2257, then how is she, she must be really old in that 40-year prior period to Next Generation. That doesn't make a lot of sense, but whatever, I shrugged and went with it. But now it makes more sense why Garrett was a part of this movie, because it only takes place 40 years prior to TNG and works more in tandem with established canon when we would eventually see Garrett as the captain of the Enterprise that then travels through time into the Next Generation era.
Yes. And we have to understand that the character of Rachel Garrett is one of the captains prior to Picard.
Yes. And this is also obviously prior to her becoming captain.
Yes.
So, David, now where we fucked up is in our interpretation in what the Guardian of Forever actually did. Now, we had assumed when he said he sent Georgiou in the 3rd season of Discovery, when he had said he's going to send her back to a time before, we had assumed it was, we had characterized it or explained it as a time before
the incursions, apparently.
Before the incursion. But what he meant was the rift, the way they can travel between dimensions. They were no longer aligned. It was broken. And that's why she was being torn apart in the 32nd century, because the rift was too far apart. The timelines had veered too far away from each other. So by putting her in the 24th century, 40 years prior to the TNG, she could live in the Prime universe without being ripped apart.
And we assumed that basically, from what the Guardian Forever said, that would mean the closest point would have been the first time we've ever seen the incursions happen.
They had expressed at some point in Star Trek, I forget what series it was, that the roots of the Terran Empire, the actual incursion, had taken place sometime during the 20th century.
Yes.
So we had assumed, okay, well, you're sending her back to that time period, to the Prime universe before an incursion had happened. But that's not the case. So that's our mistake and how we interpret it. And that's partially why we were so fucking confused. But as a listener had said, he justified for us. You know, I mean, listen, the movie did it to itself. It was already confusing enough.
Confusing enough.
So that clarifies the chronological aspects of Section 31, where we were obviously confused and pulling our hair out and why it didn't make a lot of sense. Now we know. This takes place 40 years prior to TNG. This is where the Guardian of Forever had sent her. This time period, during the time when the Prime Universe and the Terran Empire were more closely aligned, meaning the gateways and or pathways to travel in between the dimensions.
But Mike, does it help the movie?
No. No. And that's what I said. And I think I even discussed with a couple of our other listeners as well, that even though we weren't quite clear on the chronological aspects, it doesn't take away from the problems of the film itself.
Yes.
In fact, the problems with the film itself become greater because how did you not clarify this in your movie?
Exactly. That's the problem I mean, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, like, the ingredients that you put in Section 31. The ingredients were bad still. The ingredients were still expired. So you still had bad ingredients going into your story. Regardless of, like, your explanation and everything is like, that's what I would tell them is like, okay, I get your explanation. Good explanation. It is a good, solid explanation. But the ingredients were still bad.
Yeah. That's not, yeah. This chronological clarification doesn't fix the movie. The movie is still incredibly broken.
Because, like, I remember when you actually brought this up to me and I went back and I watched Section 31 again and it still didn't work. It still did not help the matter that now I understand why Rachel Garrett's here and it's more understandable. But even with that, you still didn't treat the character right.
Well, you know, this is the problem with a movie like this, David. So, okay, let's forget about the fact that the movie just written poorly and the story was just bizarre and it didn't feel anything like Star Trek at all. Let's forget about all that, Dave.
Okay.
And let's just look at the fact that you're writing a movie that belongs in a franchise and you're not making this just for non-Star Trek fans. In fact, the majority of the people that are going to watch this are going to be, in fact, Star Trek fans. So you would think that you would design a movie that we can understand. I could see possibly non-Star Trek fans watching this and not having any problems with the chronological aspects because they're not aware of it anyways.
Yeah.
So they could sit down and watch this movie and be like, okay, cool. But the people that were confused were the Star Trek fans. It wasn't just us, David. We weren't the only ones. There were tons of people trying to figure this out because it wasn't clear. And I would argue that Star Trek fans are more intelligent than most fandoms.
Oh, I would make that.
And we are more intelligent than most other fandoms. And the fact that so many of us were like, wait, what is happening? I don't understand. When does this take place? Goes to show you that there were some really just bad decisions made all the way around with this movie.
Yeah. And that's why I said is like, that should have been our first inkling that, oh no, something's wrong with the cake at this point that they're gonna serve us.
Yeah, someone like Alex Kurtzman stuck his dick in the cake is what he did.
Oh no, he just didn't stick his dick in the cake, Mike. He told us it was going to be a nice, delicious chocolate cake, and the chocolate was poop.
Oh man, he took a shit in there too.
Took a shit and mixed up the flour,
and then he fucked the shit cake.
Exactly.
Wow.
And then he fucked the shit cake. And
so disgusting. That's the worst. What is that? Is that a simile or an allegory? I don't even know what the fuck that would be. A parable?
A parable. But that's the thing that still baffles me. Even if you do put her, now we understand the proper timeline that she's in. The problem with that is just like what you alluded to. It makes you even more angry.
Yeah, it did.
Because it's kind of like, okay, you're in the unknown region of Star Trek lore. You could have done a lot. You could have given us something really awesome, because you're dealing in an unknown area that we as Star Trek fans have been yearning for.
Yeah.
We do want to know what the story of Rachel Garrett was, because like she's one of the lost captains of the Enterprise. You know, when it comes to the captains of the Enterprise, you have Archer, then it jumps to Pike at that point, which is a lot.
David, hold on 1 second really quick. But let's not go too far away really quick, because I don't want to go too far away from what we were talking about previously. But David, also, okay, let's say we're okay, David, with the chronological aspects now, right?
Yeah.
Okay, it's clear, we get it, but it still makes no sense to the members of Section 31.
Oh my God.
Meaning, okay, if she was working for Section 31 in 2257.
Yes.
Hold on, I'm going to get my years correct this time. So if it means that we're silent for a little bit, oh well. Okay, so if she was a part of Section 31 in 2257.
Yes.
And now she resurfaced in 2324. No one from Section 31 bothers to ask, why do you look the same? And how did you get here? Where have you been for, 50 years, roughly? Where have you been? And why haven't you aged?
Yes.
No questions. And you could argue, well, maybe that happened off screen. But it didn't, because we saw their first contact with each other. We saw our characters meet each other for the first time, where she figured out they're from Section 31, meaning that's the first time they contacted her since she disappeared.
Yes.
And nobody questions in that moment, what happened to you? Why do you look different? How did you end up here?
And here's the thing. People might say, well, the universe is a large place, right, Mike? The universe is a large place, so maybe the Section 31 didn't realize that she was there. That makes me even more angry, because what the hell is JoJo doing this whole time then? You mean to tell me she gets sent back in time by the Guardian of Forever and she just sits on her ass?
That's the other thing, David. Like, she was supposed to be different.
She's supposed to be different.
And she goes and I guess we could assume she murders someone, takes their station from them, and just lives a decadent lifestyle after all of the character improvements and development. That's what the whole movie is, just an injustice to Star Trek. It's an injustice to one of the David, I would argue that Georgiou is one of the best Star Trek characters of the decade.
Oh yeah, you can make that argument.
She's the best thing in Discovery, what they do with her.
Because her arc is so well done. Because you start, and we're not talking about the prime Philip Georgiou. We're talking the Terran Empire Philip Georgiou.
Yeah. Yeah.
She starts off as this ruthless empress who has a connection and a deep fondness for Burnham, for this one person. And that's what starts her on the path of redemption. And for what would you say, 3 seasons?
Mm-hmm.
For 3 seasons, we see that story arc of where she becomes Philip Georgiou, the tyrannical empress who would kill you for simply looking at her wrong, to Burnham's confidant, who was basically there to reassure Burnham in her most dire moments as a mentor and say, yeah, you can see it the Federation way, but this is also another way you can see it. And becomes a teacher to her, a true mentor, where she starts off as basically this person who's just obsessed with Burnham.
Yeah, it's a great story.
Her
story arc is one of the strongest elements of Star Trek Discovery.
And you mean to tell me you take a character like that, and yeah, maybe the Guardian Forever is this lays out this whole, thing to Georgiou that's saying you cannot You don't disrupt the timelines. We need to drop you off here, and you need to basically have a low profile. Okay, you can say that, but unfortunately,
But he didn't say that.
he didn't say that. And then when you start Section 31, Georgiou just reverts back into her Terran personality, which is like, there's no explanation for it. You mean all the shit that she basically went through with Saru and Burnham and the crew of
Tilly and
Tilly.
Yeah, it's strange.
It gets flushed down the toilet.
This movie is just, the more I think about it, David, the more frustrated I get. In a lot of ways, I want to reject this movie. I have never, David, I don't believe in rejecting movies. Like, meaning if it's a part of canon, the last IP where I rejected a movie and refused to acknowledge it is Highlander 2.
No, Mike, let's all just fly off into space like Peter Pan.
This, Star Trek Section 31, the movie,
Is Highlander 2.
is Highlander 2.
It is, yes.
They Highlander 2 this son of a bitch. That's what they did. They fucked us over like Highlander 2 fucked us over.
And now we're left with hoping and praying that they will come up with something better, like Highlander Quickening, which doesn't work.
Please, David, let it stop. Let it stop.
And then they'll come out with Section 31, Black Ops.
I don't even, this is how sad, David, it is. I don't even have a taste for Section 31 anymore. That's all I ever wanted. Section 31 series, Section 31, story arcs.
No, I don't want it now.
And now it's like, nah, fuck it. You guys fucked it up. I don't even want to think about it.
Yeah, if this is what you guys think what Section 31 is, that's the one thing that I like cracked up at, like, while rewatching it. We're supposed to, before this movie, we were made to believe Section 31 is this covert, behind the shadows organization. All their agents are like Cold War aspect spies. You don't know who a Section 31 operative is. This movie throws that whole idea out the window and just treats them like they are Call of Duty soldiers that they call on for Black Ops missions. And it's like they reduce the idea of this Black Ops almost like a society or a cabal within the Federation to protect the Federation into, I don't know, Suicide Squad.
Yeah.
Where it's just a bunch of bad guys who basically get called into duty to save the day. And that is such an injustice to the core concept of what Section 31 represents. Because Section 31 is supposed to represent the idea that basically there is a price to be paid to maintain the utopia of the Federation. Guess who keeps that intact? That's Section 31.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, how does the Federation form, David? Think about it. We were talking about this off air. You have Starfleet's Apollonian is the stand-in for the Apollonian side.
Yes.
Section 31 is a Dionysian. You bring them together, and they create the safe consistency of the Federation.
Yeah.
So anyways, okay, David, so you brought up a point. What did you say a few moments ago? You said it so well about this is what they think Section 31 is. That's another thing I started to think about after watching this movie, and I had more time to think about it and get angry. Okay, so Section 30, they turned Section 31, as we were saying in the review, to like some low-rent Suicide Squad.
Yeah.
Each of these characters, except for maybe Garrett, don't really care about the Federation. They don't really care about Starfleet. Even Sloane in Deep Space Nine, when Section 31 was first introduced in live action, Sloane was kind of a slippery, slimy spook, right? I mean,
he's a spook.
Yeah, he everything that you characterize those secret 00 agents, like that's what he was. But what did he say to Bashir? When Bashir said, well, who is your oversight? He's all, well, we essentially, and I'm paraphrasing here, the idea was that Section 31, in order for Section 31 not to go off the deep end and become something that it shouldn't be, is they're very careful with who they recruit. They recruit people like Bashir who have the ability to self-mediate.
Yes.
Which means they're all good people at their core. Look at Ash Tyler in Discovery.
Ash Tyler in Discovery.
They were good people that understood what was at stake. And because they only recruited a certain type of person, that was how they maintained and mediated Section 31. It was because of the inherent goodness of the people they recruited.
And that's what,
none of those people in the movie were that. None of them. Maybe Garrett, but that's it.
Yeah. Even then with Garrett, they didn't portray her as a quote unquote good person. You know what I mean?
They portrayed her as someone who was babysitting.
That was
it.
That's not the traits of someone that basically Sloane mentions to Bashir. Or even like take it for example, like you bring up like the one character that I was like going, why didn't they bring back Ash? They should have brought back Ash Tyler because he represents what makes a good Section 31 operative.
Especially with how they ended it for him in season 2.
Season 2.
That was the clear statement that he is the future of Section 31. And he's going to be the one to fix it.
Yeah, where he basically, essentially, because he becomes like this perfect foil because he understands what it takes to actually, quote unquote, win the game. He knows what the costs are, and he's willing to pay those costs.
Well, think about it. Being half human and half Klingon, essentially, you have the human Federation ideals mixed with the Klingon honor.
Yeah.
Like, what? That's like the perfect person right there.
The perfect person. That would be a Section 31 operative.
Yeah, that's why it worked. That's why I always liked the idea of him being a part of Section 31. And then you see this movie who takes that idea that Section 31 is governed by inherently good people who are willing to do things that might not be good, but because they're inherently good, they know the line and they know when to not cross it. They just throw that completely out to give us some low-rent Suicide Squad.
And you bring up, I know a lot of Star Trek fans would bring up, well, Sloane wasn't a nice person. No, if you actually look at, like, in hindsight, the story of DS9 with Sloane may not have been a nice person, but he was a person that had stuck to his morals.
He had his own agenda. Let me backtrack. He didn't have his own agenda. His agenda was to protect the Federation. And the reason why he wanted Bashir was because he needed him to bring the balance. That was what he said to him. We need people like you.
And that ultimately changes Sloane from like this, quote unquote, as people put it, some people consider Sloane a villain.
I would agree that he's probably on paper a villain.
But like once he actually made once you do that twist in the end, where he looks at Bashir and he basically says, no, we need people like you in Section 31 to keep the balance.
Yeah.
Suddenly it comes into view that Sloane, his morals don't equal ours, but his goal is the same: protect the Federation.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's all we can really say about Section 31. But if we want to go through the major, I think we should go before closing out. Let's go through the major time periods of Star Trek just for coherent purposes so that people can understand the vast history of Star Trek and where they chose to throw Section 31 just defies logic in a lot of ways. With all of the centuries you can use, like, why this? So you have 2063 is First Contact with Vulcans, which is depicted in Star Trek First Contact. Yep. The 22nd century, which takes place between 2100 and 2199, is predominantly filled with stories from Star Trek Enterprise. So from 21 to 51, or 2151 to 2161 is the events of Star Trek Enterprise. Captain Jonathan Archer commands the NXL-1, Earth's first warp ship. Then you have the 23rd century, which is the era of Kirk, Spock, and the original series. Okay, within this, Okay, you have the birth of James T. Kirk, which took place in 2233.
Yes.
2256 through 2258 are the events of Star Trek Discovery, which also takes place in this same era, the Kirk and Spock era. Within that sub-era, or I should say in that era, you have subcategories. You had the Klingon War, the Red Angel Mystery. And then, of course, Burnham and the USS Discovery, they disappear into the 32nd century. Okay, then you have the Star Trek, the original series, that picks up immediately after, roughly. When I say immediately, give or take a few years, 2265. Then you have the animated series, 2270s. You have the original Star Trek film timeline, 2285 to 2293. Then you have the 24th century, which is the TNG DS9 Voyager era. And of course, that is the Borg encounter, the Dominion War. Voyager gets lost in the Delta Quadrant. You have Star Trek Nemesis, Lower Decks, and Star Trek Prodigy also take place within this century, although Lower Decks and Prodigy take place in the latter portion of the 24th century.
Yeah.
Now, the 25th century, many people tend to think this is the TNG era, but it actually isn't. 24th century is Picard. 2401 to 2402, Star Trek Picard. Then you have the 32nd century, which is the 3100s. And that's Discovery season 3 and 4.
Yeah.
So there are so many. I mean, you could have picked a time period between the 25th and the 32nd century that would have been more interesting and would have given you, as a writer of Section 31, the movie, to gives you some wiggle room.
Yeah.
You imagine the movie taking place between the 25th and the 32nd century. Then there would be none of this fuckery.
Yeah.
There's no chronological discrepancies. There's no questions about canon. There's no worrying about canon because there's nothing that's been written in this time period.
Mm-hmm.
What is wrong with going into new eras, David? Why are people in Hollywood so fucking afraid to move forward?
But Mike, if we did that, we wouldn't have been able to add Rachel Garrett.
No, who gives a shit?
But that's the thing.
I know, David, but imagine, we're one step away. We're 2 or 3 years away, David, from doing things even worse. Meaning, well, we made Discovery take place 10 years prior to Enterprise, but what if we made a series that takes place between season 1 and season 2 of Star Trek Enterprise? That might be pretty cool. And it actually has to do with Trip. Well, wouldn't that happen? Well, I don't know. But it takes place between. They're going to start digging in between the years now.
Yeah.
Like, move forward. This is why I am glad. I know a lot of Star Trek fans don't agree with this. I'm glad Star Trek Academy is taking place in the 32nd century.
Yeah.
We need to move forward. Or at least move into uncharted territory. I'm okay with things taking place in the post-Picard era. That's wide open now.
That's wide open. That's what makes Star Trek Legacy so much more better sounding in my brain because there's potential.
I agree.
There's
Star Trek
potential
Legacy makes sense. It's not working in the past in a real. Yes, it is in a canon sense now because Discovery's moved into the 32nd century, but it's not fucking around with eras of Star Trek that have already been written.
Exactly. And because while it's nice to have those member berries and have those nostalgic moments.
Is it though? Do we, David, you and I aren't really into that stuff.
Yes, I agree. Me and you aren't into
You're talking
that,
generally speaking, like for fans.
For fans, because everyone loves their Easter eggs. Everyone loves their, I want to call back to this time in my life.
I want to see Picard when he was 12.
I want to see a younger version of this character. I get it. While those are nice, this is Section 31 shows you this is what happens when you just simply go somewhere without a real solid game plan. And think about it, Mike. On paper, in my brain, I could come up with a really cool idea of let's do a story about the lost years prior to TNG and centered it around Captain Garrett, because that character has been almost kind of like a mysterious leader character that we as Star Trek fans say, oh yeah, she's like an important character because, well, number one, she's always portrayed as like that freaking statue in front of the Starfleet Academy. So we know she's important. She's one of the very few captains of the Enterprise, of the Starship Enterprise, that we don't know anything about of. The only ones that come close to like captains that we don't know a lot about of than Garrett is probably Decker. And even that character would be cool to actually know about more about before he becomes like V'ger.
A carbon unit.
A carbon unit. But like, I mean, think about like what they've done with Pike. You could have done that with Garrett. That would have been really cool. But no.
This is why, David, I'm not looking forward to.
Let's give her
listen.
a wig. Let's give her a wig and dye her hair and make her look all Suicide Squad, like Harley Quinn.
Yeah, let's make her edgy.
Let's make her edgy.
This is why, David, when they announced not too long ago, when they announced that they're working on a Star Trek movie that takes place prior to Kirk, and I believe it's even prior to the events of Enterprise, and I'm like, why?
Why? Yeah.
I mean, the only good thing about that is that there's going to be one timeline. So technically, anything they do in that movie has ramifications for both the Kelvin timeline and the Prime Universe.
In the Prime Universe.
That's the only cool aspect. But no one really cares about any of that shit but me.
Yeah.
No one else is thinking, oh, that's pretty cool. It's dual serving. It serves the Kelvin timeline and the Prime.
Exactly.
Woo! And maybe that's why they're doing it, so they don't have to worry about, well, is this Prime or Kelvin? Maybe that's their logic. Well, let's go in the past, and then we don't even have to worry about Prime and Kelvin.
Exactly. Instead, but
again, David, you're going to the past.
You're going to the past.
It was already made clear in Enterprise that deep space travel and a lot of these alien species weren't really a thing until they traveled into deep space.
Yeah. Until Enterprise.
Yeah, I mean, you had Vulcans and different other smaller alien species already finding its way to the planet. That's why Enterprise had that entire episode about Terra Prime.
Yeah, Terra Prime.
Where they were trying to kick out all of the non-humans off of Earth. So we know there were aliens there. But, I mean, how interesting is something going to be when it's grounded to Earth?
Yeah.
And also, transporters weren't being used. Enterprise made it clear that transporters were brand new. So much so that they didn't even use it for 2 seasons because they were terrified of it.
Yeah.
Like, what? Really? That's the movie you want?
And what if that spells Star Trek?
Now, maybe they can do a story that deals with Section 31 and that, you know, the idea of the chartering of the Federation, but that also bleeds into Enterprise territory. So are we going to be recasting Enterprise? Is this going to be an Enterprise story?
Yeah.
Dude, it seems so weird. This is why these producers, and it's not just a Kurtzman era, dude.
It's even more frustrating, Mike, and I just thought about this. If they wanted to do some fuckery and send JoJo back in time where there's a point in time when basically the timelines were more parallel and safer for her to be at, why not just basically, okay, you already hinted at Star Trek Legacy, drop her in the freaking timeline right after Picard. That, because there's such a big, gigantic gap from the end of Picard to where Discovery is in 32nd century, you have that wiggle room. And guess what? You can play a lot of fuckery still around there, and all of a sudden, look, you have Georgiou dealing with TNG characters. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes a little bit more sense.
Theoretically, anything could work. The Section 31 movie could have worked. The movie that is allegedly going way in the past could work. But in order for these types of ideas to work, you need to hire incredibly capable people. And right now, currently in Hollywood, the amount of capable people I can count on one hand. And I'm not being a radical in saying that. I'm not trying to be controversial or provocative. It is the facts. It's something we talk about a lot on this network when we talk about film and media and the business on our other podcasts. There are a lot of problems right now in Hollywood. They are losing talented people by the droves.
Yeah.
There are people in writing rooms who have never written before. They don't understand the process of movie making. So my point is that rather than throwing yet another obstacle in the way of these writers, give them some room, because obviously a lot of these capabilities they do not have.
Yeah.
So make it easier for them rather than making it difficult, and just stay away from timelines and eras that we've already worked within, unless you plan on hiring one of the most hardcorest writers of all time. If you bring back Brian Fuller, or you bring back Ronald D. Moore,
Yeah.
then anything you could throw at them, a purple alien that comes back from time and becomes Borg. Like, you could think of the most ridiculous ideas, and those two gentlemen will make it work. Those guys, they represent true fucking writing talent.
They will take your shit ingredients,
Yeah,
and turn the shit into Dutch chocolate.
yeah, they'll take that poop shit cake that Kurtzman likes to fuck. So stupid. And they will fuck it and turn Kurtzman into a cuck. That's so inappropriate. I'm going to delete all that. All right, we need to wrap today's discussion. We weren't trying to be mean-spirited, and I hopefully it didn't come off that way. We're just trying to have a good time and work through our own little anger issues that we had with this movie, because it did. It did. We don't get angry a lot. We actually are I think we're pretty welcoming to the new Star Trek. We're one of the few fans that covered Discovery fairly, in my opinion.
Yeah.
We were fair with Picard despite its issues in the first season. We have been gracious to Strange New Worlds. We haven't, been avid haters of Kurtzman. Well, we'll call him out when need be. But we've been trying to be supportive because, in all honesty, David, I'm not saying this just to be supportive. In my opinion, the Kurtzman era Star Trek is not nearly as bad as people say it is.
Yeah.
I mean, it started off rough, but slowly but surely they have tried to smooth it out a bit. And I think for the most part, we are in a pretty good place right now in terms of Star Trek. But if we get another Section 31 mistake, we won't be in a good place.
Well, the thing is, Mike, is kind of like with especially with this film, I kind of came up with this funny idea that basically I look at Section 31 as a Star Trek fan as like having sex with the Duras sisters.
Oh,
it sounds great. They look fantastic, and I'm sure it'd be really fun. But at the end of the day, afterwards, I'm going to be bloodied and bruised and questioning, why did I do this?
Yep. That's a good way to put it, David. All right. I guess that's it, David. I think we should probably remind people about our Patreon. If you guys want to get more discussions, and we do need the support of our listeners, we are a listener-supported podcast. It's really the only way we can continue to do these discussions. So if they're important to you, please go to our Patreon page, patreon.com/RainmanDigital, and pledge. If you pledge $5 or more a month, you'll gain access to our additional Star Trek discussions, as well as our Enterprise discussions, our bonus Enterprise discussions. We're doing a lot of things pertaining to Star Trek this year in 2025, and we want you guys to be along for the ride, mostly because it helps us. We wouldn't mind talking to ourselves. All right, David, thank you.
All right, thank you. Live long and prosper.